Today, I'd like to introduce Dr. Jason McKeown. He is the CEO of Neurovalens, a company that is working on non-invasive neurostimulation technology for a variety of applications. He's also a visiting scholar at UC San Diego's Center for Brain and Cognition. Dr. McKeown holds a PhD from Queen's University, Belfast in medicine. Additionally, he has training and experience as a practicing physician. Could you tell us your story? I gave a quick intro, but I'd love to hear a bit more about your background.
Yeah, excellent. Thanks so much, Robert, for having me on the podcast as well. I'm very happy to give some of my background and how it all relates to the company that we formed, and then also into the neurotechnology that we've developed. But as you touched on, yeah, my background personally is in medicine. So I worked as a practicing doctor in the UK for a good few years, but I really enjoy electronics. So I'm almost sort of self-taught to a limited degree on how sort of electronics work, how computers work, hardware works. And actually, I think had the choice been up to me, I probably would have ended up being my career. But the opportunity to do medicine came up, and I was kind of encouraged to do that because everybody, loved the idea of like someone, say, in the family doing medicine. And I think that was the right choice. But ultimately, my interest in electronics then, it really got sort of heightened whenever I was working in neurosurgery, and we used to see these old implanted neurostimulators. So I'm sure you've heard of deep brain, or I'm sure your audience have heard of, deep brain implants and vagus nerve stimulators. So we used to see these guys in the neurosurgery ward, and you're maybe replacing it or repairing it or whatever. And at that point, myself and my colleague, is Dr. Paul McGeown, we were working together, and we just asked two fundamental questions. One is, do these devices need to be implanted? And the other is, does it actually need to be the vagus nerve? There's a lot of interest in the vagus nerve. So cutting that story short, we then both were given positions at UC San Diego to really take this a step further. And whenever we realized we had a non-invasive way to stimulate the brainstem or hypothalamus and brainstem, and I set up Neurovalens as a UK listed medical device company. And since that time, we've taken sort of funding and grants, and we've done lots of clinical research. And now we're starting to get through that R&D phase into the approval phase. And just last comment for now, and I'm sure we'll touch on this later, but our first approval or FDA approval or clearance is the term 510(k) clearance, but everybody sort of would say, medical device approval. That actually came through a couple of months ago, and that is a non-invasive treatment for chronic insomnia. But as I say, I'm sure we'll touch on that later. So yeah, that's just a very quick snapshot of where it all started.
Yeah, absolutely. It sounds like it's been an exciting journey so far, and also congrats on that clearance.
Yeah, no, thank you. Yeah, definitely lots of ups and downs. I think that's true of any startup. But then, yeah, there's the additional challenge with medical device startups that, you need regulatory approval. So, yeah, ups and downs with the FDA and the regulators as well.
Yeah, absolutely. That definitely adds another layer of complexity to things. And to go back into the past a little bit, what sparked your initial interest in neuroscience or neurotechnology? I think you mentioned that, the deep brain stimulators and the neurosurgery kind of brought you towards the electronic side. But what got you interested in neuroscience in general in the first place?
Again, just when I was younger, I had an interest in this. I really like everything neuro, stretching from almost like psychology, psychiatry, right into the other end, which was, for a while when I was a junior doctor, I was working as in neurosurgery. So yeah, I've always really enjoyed that. And the other kind of important element to this is even as a doctor, I prescribe drugs all the time, but the concept of taking a drug, let's say it's to target an area in your brain that's maybe a very small little area. Well, you swallow that drug, and the compound is right across your body. It isn't, the concentration of that drug is the same in your big toe as it is in this little target area in your brain. So the risk of a receptor being activated somewhere systemically, because you have to get a good high dose to try and get into the brain, and then all of a sudden you get all these kind of crazy side effects. And we unfortunately, we've seen really serious outcomes where drugs were thought to be safe, but actually these kind of systemic receptors or whatever were causing all sorts of trouble. So I personally, as a doctor, really like the idea of a drug-free treatment or drug-free interventions. And there's a massive movement to that. So, there's like digital health is such a big thing now, and wellness, but also than in our space specifically targeting that area of the brain, but instead of a drug, using electricity. In short, yeah, I'm really interested in everything neuro, but particularly treatments that don't involve drugs.
And so we kind of touched on this a little bit already, but I was wondering if you could give us some further detail on the story of Neurovalens, so the background and the timeline and the origins of the company.
Yeah, we're based in Belfast. So some people would know Belfast from the whole troubles between kind of north and south of Ireland. But the north of Ireland's a UK-based company, so we're strictly speaking we're a UK-based company, but we're on the island of Ireland. And the reason I'm mentioning this is that since that time where things in Belfast weren't great, the city has totally transformed and has become a hub of innovation. So there's so much support. There is, grant funding. There are really smart people coming out of. There's 2 universities in Belfast, and the skill set that is there is phenomenal. But whenever you factor in the cost of employing people, office space, everything, it's just unbelievably more efficient than, say, setting up in San Diego, which is probably the other place that I was looking at, given I was based at UC San Diego. So quite often I get asked why didn't set up in California, but it's for all of those reasons. And at the very start, probably around sort of 2014 into 2015, is whenever we had our first kind of employees. There was a very, very small team of us. I was still working in medicine, so I was working up until 2017. I was still working like night shifts in the hospital just to get extra cash to try and pay for some of our pilot studies. And then there's a local body, almost like a kind of government body called Invest Northern Ireland. And in 2015, they put us through their accelerator program called Propel. And that was the first time it really allowed me almost to start making this my full-time job. And at the end of that program, we actually ended up winning the Company of the Year, and that was right at the end of 2015. So that was almost like it was a very positive thing in my eyes, saying that look, we've been awarded this, so there's definitely potential. So we should really go at this now. And then around that time, we started taking investor like VC investment, mostly from Belfast companies initially, and then over the years we spread that right out to London and Cambridge. And I think actually in total we've maybe raised across a few different like grants, crowdfunding, VC funding, probably about 17 million US dollars, and we'd be looking to raise again probably this year, if not a couple of times maybe this year. And then just last kind of part of this is then what do we use that funding for? We've grown the team now to 20 full-time people based in Belfast, but then in parallel we've completed 3 pivotal clinical trials. So one in insomnia, one in anxiety, and one in obesity. And we have 2 other big trials ongoing, one in PTSD and one in type 2 diabetes. And the first approval, as I said, was insomnia, but actually literally later today I have a call with the FDA about the anxiety approval, and then later this year we will formally submit for an obesity approval. So yeah, lot of stuff has happened, but probably all kind of kicked off 2015 properly.
Wow. You guys have been working on this for a while, it sounds like, and with these approvals, things are all starting to come together. So wishing you good luck on the next couple approvals, and I'm excited to see what happens next. So now to dive in a little bit more to the specific technology, I was wondering what type of stimulation does Neurovalens use? I was looking around a little bit on the website. It appeared it might be like TDCS, but I wasn't sure if it was spelled out specifically on there.
Yeah, that's a great sort of point to bring up. So if you look at what we do, it's almost, I would say, like a vagus nerve stimulator, but instead of using the vagus nerve, we actually use the vestibular nerves. And to kind of dive into it, maybe in a little bit more detail, there are many types of neurostimulators. There's sort of MagStim or TMS, where you put a magnet across some of the cortex. There's then TDCS or TACS as well, and a lot of people sometimes really dive into the difference between those, but ultimately they are stimulating the surface neurons, usually across your kind of prefrontal cortex. So typically these are applied sort of to the head. So the goal there is to actually stimulate just the top surface, or maybe a little deeper, of the brain and alter the neurons. Whereas a cranial nerve stimulator, like a vagus nerve implanted stimulator, it actually activates the nerve. So it actually causes activation or action potentials in the nerve. And then that signal is carried up the nerve into the brainstem where it actually changes autonomic function. So that's very different than trying to stimulate the surface neurons on the cortex versus trying to stimulate the deep, really ancient areas of the brain, actually brainstem and all the hypothalamic nuclei. So specifically, we are a cranial nerve stimulator. We pass electricity through the skin into the vestibular nerves, which are part of the inner ear. And from the surface, then those nerve fibers actually carry directly down into the brainstem. So imagine an electrical wire carrying a charge. So from the surface, we can send signal down into the brainstem. Yeah, does that answer the question?
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you very much for explaining those details to me. The next question I had was kind of hopping back towards talking about the FDA clearances. I believe you mentioned that the insomnia treatment is already cleared and you're working on a couple additional ones. If I remember correctly, it had one was anxiety, and I think the other one was related to obesity. And so I was wondering, are there any other clinical trials that are coming up soon, or any in the pipeline as things you might want to look towards treating in the future?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah. The trials, our first exploration into this whole technique, it was actually based around metabolic disease. Although we didn't maybe know this when we started, but with time, the company has become, there's two sides to it. There's our metabolic type treatments, and then there's our neuro or mental health type treatments. But our first look into all of this was actually as a therapy to help people who have obesity. And the reason behind that is it's actually quite interesting. But your inner ear, that direct connection to your brainstem and hypothalamus, that is actually used by the body in part to determine energy utilization. So your inner ear tells you a lot about balance, but it also tells you if you've been running around, imagine a cheetah running around the desert, lots of activity from the vestibular system to the hypothalamus to say that energy utilization needs to be more towards bone and muscle than it does to storing fat, because imagine a cheetah storing large amounts of fat. Whereas conversely, think of a bear hibernating in a cave. They are sedentary, they do not move, so there's zero inner ear activity. And so there's zero feedback from the inner ear or the vestibular system to the hypothalamus to say that where energy utilization goes. And in that scenario, energy utilization goes to storing fat. And there are other things. I'm sure your audience are probably thinking like a million and one things that influence how your body stores fat or energy. Absolutely. I am not saying this is the only one, but categorically, your vestibular system influences how your body stores fat. So we then started looking at could we almost activate those neurons beyond where they're normally activated, and so send the signal to your hypothalamus that actually energy utilization is not what it should be, and that the hypothalamus allows then body fat to reduce. So our first trial was actually it's like a 200, I can't remember exact figures, it was like 200 person trial, sham controlled. So we have a placebo sham device and we have an active device, and those people wore that daily for 6 months. And actually, we're sort of working through approval, but within that trial, we had a very significant reduction in visceral fat. So fat around your organs, independent of weight loss. The device usage actually caused about a 13% reduction in visceral fat, which is very meaningful. And the sham group, I think, was maybe like a 3 or 4%, which correlates with weight loss. So the goal of that is actually to get an FDA approval as probably a weight management intervention where people who have, say, high visceral fat could benefit from adding our device into their improved lifestyle. So you improve your diet, you improve your exercise, but you wear our device and it boosts almost how much visceral fat that's where we hope we're getting to with the FDA later this year. But that trial was very long and the recruitment is very slow, and it just sort of takes forever. But when that was up and running, we then started looking at these other areas, specifically insomnia and anxiety. And we approached the FDA and said, look, we think we can improve insomnia. The mechanism for this is through nerves in your inner ear. It would be the same mechanism as like rocking a baby. So whenever you rock a baby, it actually causes vestibular activation. So that sort of low frequency rocking sends a signal to your brainstem, actually, that induces a move for your brain towards a sleep state. So we approached the FDA and said, look, we think we can do this. They said, yep, fine. Here's the trial design, blah, 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 blah. And did the trial, but it recruited so quickly that we closed it down way ahead of schedule. And it actually leapfrogged our original work that we had started several years before. So we all of a sudden we had finished the whole Insomnia trial and we had everything ready. So we just submitted it to the FDA really as soon as we could. And that was probably around Easter time last year. And then back and forth with the FDA for, well, close to 9 months maybe. And then eventually at the end of it, they then approved the device and we're allowed to treat or doctors in the US are allowed to prescribe our device now for anyone who has chronic, and almost anyone. I mean, there are some limitations, but almost anyone who has chronic insomnia. So it's pretty exciting for us, because if you think back to what I said earlier about what I'm kind of passionate about, like we've created an electronic device. It is non-invasive. There are no drugs involved, and we can categorically treat chronic insomnia.
Yeah, absolutely. That's quite a journey. And it's so interesting how, the insomnia trials and research was able to kind of leapfrog the metabolic research. And a quick question on like patient experience. How long do the patients wear the device? For the insomnia, for example, would they wear it while they're sleeping? Or for obesity, would they wear it just a few minutes a day or all day? How does the setup of the patient wearing it work?
Yeah. I just realized actually I didn't totally finish answering your previous question. So just very quickly, I'll say, so those were there was almost like a phase 1 and a phase 2. So all the phase, and sorry, that's a bad choice of term because I don't mean a phase 1 clinical trial. I just mean within the company, let's say stage 1. So stage 1 was obesity, insomnia, anxiety. Those 3 trials are finished. We have the results. We're working through the submissions. Stage 2 then was type 2 diabetes, which is an extension of the obesity sort of mechanism, essentially. And then PTSD. Actually, we have nationwide recruitment. We're looking at treatment for PTSD right across the US. It's all run out of UC San Diego, but we do it all remotely. That's kind of stage 2. And then now we're entering into stage 3, which is design and pilot studies. And we have just started a pilot study in depression, but we'd also look at a few other neurological issues like chronic pain potentially is one, and maybe drug withdrawal is the other. So those are the 3 stages. Sorry, just to answer your last question. Then your more recent question then was about patient experience. All of our devices the hardware is almost the same. Let's just say it's the same. But we can program the devices independently. So our Insomnia device has a different stimulation parameter than the obesity device, and it is different from the depression device, and the depression device is different from the PTSD device. So all of the devices are individual in terms of stimulation, but the patient experience is almost identical regardless. So typically we say you wear this for 30 minutes a day. The metabolic trials are 60 minutes per day. So let's take the insomnia one, for example, 30 minutes per day. Put the device on. You can increase the current voltage. Eventually you'll feel a bit of tingling in the skin, and then as you increase a little further, there's actually a threshold where you will reach an activation point of the vestibular nerves, and at that point with the Insomnia device, the users actually feel a very gentle sense of sway, almost like they're on a hammock, like similar to that rocking a baby. And that's actually quite a relaxing feeling, and many people fall asleep wearing the device there and then, but most people will watch an episode on Netflix or television or whatever for 30 minutes. After that, the device turns off. They take it off, put it in the box or whatever, and then within an hour or so, we would recommend that those patients go to bed. So it's a pretty low burden intervention. It's not during the night. It won't disrupt your sleep. It is only 30 minutes, and you can literally just put it on, sit and watch television. So we find patients actually really almost integrated into their daily routine, and the usage is and compliance is actually very, very high, probably a little higher than we were even anticipating. And then it just really depends until you hit your target of, say, your insomnia, where you want to get the improvement to, or if it's, say, visceral fat, how much much you want to try and reduce that by. So the patient themselves can almost decide when they want to stop the device or start maybe tapering down usage. But then the beauty of it is when or if then their symptoms start to come back, will they still have the device, can use it again? So quite often, let's say the insomnia patient experience, they'll use the device for two to 4 weeks, get a really good outcome, and then actually they don't have to use the device, or a lot of people don't have to use the device for, I mean, in the study we looked at right out to 16 weeks, and we still had a really significant improvement. But for those who maybe week 12 or whatever, they start to get their symptoms back, well, then they can just reuse the device. So in short, easy to use, and so far we've been very happy with how patients have responded to it.
Especially with, such a short amount of time for stimulation at like 30 or 60 minutes, it definitely sounds doable for a lot of patients to be able to, as you mentioned, just put it into their, morning routine or evening routine, for example. And so I think you already mentioned that there are basically different waveforms are used for the different indications with this device. And I was wondering, even though there's different waveforms, are there different targets, or are you generally targeting like the same nerves or same area of the brain?
Yeah, certainly at the periphery, it's the same target. So we're trying to get certain receptors in your inner ear. The macular gravity receptor, for example, is one of the most important ones. So that target is always the same. But we know that signal carries down into the brainstem. And I'd say in the brainstem, the vestibular nerve and the sort of vagus nerve almost join into each other. It's very difficult to tell what is what once you reach the brainstem. So that's why this is so similar to the kind of vagus nerve stimulation. But if you follow then those kind of nerve projections into different little areas of the brainstem, all these little autonomic nuclei, and then right up into the hypothalamus, our goal would be to try and activate maybe one of those pathways more than the other. And to be honest, we haven't been able to get it where it is just that pathway being activated. And the example that I often use is in our obesity trial, we had many reports of people falling asleep. And in our insomnia trial, we actually had quite a few people who reported losing weight or their appetite had been suppressed. We totally expect that. But basically, if you pick a frequency, it's going to preferentially activate a slightly different part of the brain or brainstem, although there'll be some overlap. So through looking at previous literature, through looking at implanted neurostimulators and all of the knowledge that we have about this, then we were able to almost pick frequencies that we feel will work, and then we'll test that over a pilot study, or we might test a few frequencies. And then once we start narrowing it down to where we think the efficacy is going to be greatest, then that's when we'll go into a big pivotal trial looking at, say, a specific device that we think will treat a specific outcome.
That makes a lot of sense, and thanks for explaining the details of that to me. My next question was, are there any other companies working in like a similar space to Neurovalens? And if so, what kind of differentiates your company from the others out there?
Yeah, I think there's two ways to look at this. One is what you treat, and also the other is, well, how is it done? So certainly, our target is the vestibular nerve. We know there's a lot of companies working on the auricular branch of your vagus nerve, which is kind of on the surface of your ear, and sometimes it crosses over. I actually think some of those devices are probably activating the vestibular system as well. And in a way, yeah, that's if there are. I don't think there are any other very specific vestibular nerve stimulators. As I say, there are these more kind of general stimulators in the area. But then add to that the treatments. Obesity is our big one. Type 2 diabetes, hopefully not far away either. There is no one that I know of that's doing non-invasive neurostimulation to treat metabolic diseases. There are treatments, many treatments for insomnia, and anxiety. Although what we've spotted is a lot of these companies are taking it into the wellness space. So there are no medical claims, which means the device actually doesn't have to be regulated by the FDA. And we that's fine. We actually did that before we had approval. So we have loads of real world data, and the only way we got that real world data was by providing we would say a sleep management device, because that doesn't say you have insomnia. It doesn't say it treats insomnia. It's just for a person to better manage their sleep. So we put all that out as wellness devices, and then from that evidence, we're able then to almost boost the data that we send to the FDA from the clinical trials. And the reason I'm saying this is many companies, I think, just want to stay in that wellness space. And strategically, that's fine, but we didn't want to do that. We want it to be a prescribed, FDA-approved treatment that we can make really specific claims about. So our device is indicated to treat chronic insomnia. And as I say, a lot of devices out there help with sleep, but very few, if any, can actually make that very specific claim. This has been FDA cleared to treat chronic insomnia. So for us, out of all those things, that's the biggest differentiator that we have.
It sounds like Neurovalens is differentiated on quite a few fronts, as you explained here. And so we briefly touched on this before, and when we were talking about future investment as well as future indications, but I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more regarding what is next for Neurovalens.
Yeah, I suppose now we've went from what feels like about 1,000 years of R&D to now we have our first medical product that we can prescribe, and we got our first regulatory approval from the FDA, but we now would have to subsequently get approvals in all the other territories. That's why I'm out in the Middle East at the minute. Our UK, Europe approval is, we're working through it with the regulators. We're now out here working through it with the regulators. We'll go to all the territories. So that is one big thing. It's getting regulatory buy-in across the world so that we can prescribe devices or have them prescribed, and then we can commercially then we can expand. But then on the other side is, well, funding for that. We're very lucky. Our investors that we have are all fantastic, and just at pretty much right now we're actually going through maybe like an interim funding round. So by the end of the year, we'd like to have a quite significant funding round. Don't hold me to this, but maybe in the region of like 40 million pounds or so, but it's not like £1 billion, but it's not £1 million either, so it's kind of in there. So that would be for us to, once we have the approvals, to really grow, so hire more people, grow the company, become commercial, but also finish out the clinical trials that I mentioned earlier, and then eventually get those all approved as well. But the round just now is almost like an internal round. All of our existing investors want to go again, so they're going to actually give us another, say, 12 to 18 months of runway for us then to do the bigger Series B type kind of growth funding investment.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Sounds like it's an exciting year or two ahead for Neurovalens. And I was wondering, regarding what happens next after a device gets approved by a regulatory body, after that, how do you guys get the word out to perhaps physicians that are treating these type of diseases? Do you need to then bring on like a sales force or go to a lot of conferences, or the physicians kind of keeping their eye on the approvals and once it gets approved, the word's already out there?
Yeah, all of those. So we're looking now, and part of this interim funding will be to start hire maybe just a few key commercial people, probably in the US, because that's where the first approval is. But then we were chatting earlier, I'm out in the Middle East at a medical device conference. We're literally trying to tell everyone the device is available. But then also in parallel, we've had doctors reach out to us, and we recently had our first order to a sleep clinic, sort of batch of devices that they then can prescribe and issue out to their patients. So it's a mixture of all of those. And then the additional challenge I feel that we probably have with, and this is true for any neurotech, it's not super mainstream. People sometimes think it's a bit sort of far out, and maybe some of it is questionable, the public perception is it's not really proven or whatever. So another reason why we were super keen to get the FDA clearance, because at least that's got their badge stamped on it to say yes, this definitely does treat chronic insomnia. So a big part of what we're going to do will be based around patient education and letting patients know. So we may well put advertisements on YouTube or Instagram or Facebook or TikTok or whatever, to let people know they have an alternative to drugs when it comes to their chronic insomnia. And if they're interested in this technology, go and speak to their doctor about it, or contact us, and potentially we can ship direct to people if they buy on our website. But in the US, you have to upload a prescription before we can ship it to you. But also that's already been happening. We've had people scanning their prescriptions, and then we can ship straight to their door. Lot of options, a lot of challenges, but as you said, super exciting time for the company over the next couple of years.
And that patient education thing, that's something I didn't even think about, but that makes a lot of sense with a treatment that's relatively new, especially for these indications. It's really important that patients learn about it for them to be welcome to trying it out, for example.
Absolutely. And the other thing we would like to encourage is that patients understand that, like drugs, not everyone is a responder. There's no way to tell how someone's going to respond. And not everyone will respond to our device. So not everyone, I mean, we see it in the clinical trials. Most people respond really well, but there is a group of people who just don't respond. And that's common across every treatment. But to give people reassurance or some confidence that, well, at least this is a safe device, they can try it, and over a period of 4 weeks, if they use it every day and they don't see any improvement, then we'll actually just refund them. So if they ship the device back to us, we'll refund them the full amount, and that's something we're really almost proud of doing, because we really want to help people here. We feel we can help people, but we know some people won't get a benefit, so they shouldn't lose out any money. Yes, they've used it they've spent 30 minutes of their day using it, but actually from a cash money point of view, we'll refund people.
The patients are probably really excited to hear about that plan, because it really lowers the financial risk or financial burden for them to know that they only have to pay for it if they're seeing those results.
Yeah, absolutely. We're really, it's not like a hidden sort of, we're going to try and catch people out and find a way not to refund them or whatever. We really don't do that. If the device comes back to us and it's kind of usable again, then we refund people.
Yeah, absolutely. That makes a lot of sense, and I really like that plan.
Just going to say really quickly, yeah, this is a lot of the experience we had when selling as a wellness type company, was allowed us almost to understand hesitation or things that they liked and didn't like about it. So we've had a few years of really trying to understand what would make someone want to try a device versus they feel this isn't true, or it doesn't do what it says it does, or it's not safe. So as I said earlier, the wellness side of things, we have got a lot of data from that, but it's really exciting for us that we've almost transitioned from that to being a certified medical device.
That kind of brings me to another question. When did you guys start selling the device as a wellness company? Did that start like way back in like 2013 or 2014, or did that happen like once you joined the accelerator in 2015? So how many years of data and sales have you been collecting?
The letter that I got from the FDA to allow this was in 2016. So the FDA code their letters with the year. So the first two numbers is always the year, and then there's a symbol or a different letter depending what type of submission it is. So we had a Q16, or sorry, that's not true. It's a C16, which means that letter was sent back, or that process was started in 2016, and the letter actually says that the FDA agree with our assessment, which is that under certain circumstances we can sell as a weight management device. So our obesity device, when that's designed as a weight management device, falls under the FDA's guidance for wellness products. So we got that letter in 2016, and then I think it was 2017 we actually launched on Indiegogo, the crowdfunding campaign. That's a bit like Kickstarter's the other one that I think people are familiar with. So we were able to launch on there. And, we tried to be super transparent about what we're doing. We're saying, look, we are on the path to getting this approved. That's going to take some years. Here's the science behind it. Here's the mechanism behind it. If you want to try this as a wellness device, you can do so now. And we had an unbelievable response. I mean, I must say I'm so pleased at how, I was going to say how the Indiegogo campaign went, but that was good. But what really makes me happy is the community almost of early adopters that we have, and just the support that we got at that time, even though this was almost like an unproven device. So that whole experience was fantastic. But we were able then to do two things. We used the Indiegogo funding to then make the devices. So we got them all made, designed, and we shipped them out to people. But then the other thing is, as people were starting to use the device, we were able to collect data if they shared it with us. So you don't have to share their data, but most everyone did. So we were able to track people's usage and correlate it to their weight loss, and follow up with people to see, or do people feel more appetite suppression, or do they feel more fullness, or what is it? So all of that, although, as I say, it's in that wellness space, which is a relatively new kind of space, that has been extremely beneficial for us whenever we're then moving into the medical device world. So our first, to answer specifically your question, the first wellness sales, I think, started 2017, and the first medical sales started in 2024.
Got it. Yeah. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense how, those wellness sales and, that wellness data can really end up informing some of that later research and really kind of help lead into the snowball towards these clearances that you guys are currently working towards.
Yeah. I was just going to say, real world data has become such a big thing now. The FDA guidance has actually recently been updated. I don't think it's formalized yet. It's maybe still in a draft version, but if people are interested, you can read the FDA's newest guidance on how to collect real world data. I love real world data. Actually, clinical trials are great to do statistical analysis of one group compared to the other, but in real life, you don't live in a clinical trial. Particularly when it comes to weight loss, people have social events, they have, they're traveling, there's just all of the reasons as to why they can't have almost like a prescribed diet in a clinical trial. So many things that are in the clinical trial space that may show promise, sometimes that does not translate to real world outcomes. So for us, that's why we really did the two things together with the clinical trials to show the statistical sort of outcomes, and then we had all this real world data, which shows that when integrated into day-to-day life, this device can help people manage their weight. And then all of that we've put together, and we started now speaking to the FDA in a sort of submission, but with both of those components being the justification for the efficacy.
Yeah, I totally agree about the real world data. I think it's definitely a really useful thing to have, and it really just adds another layer to the analysis or to the understanding of something. I did have another quick question regarding like the FDA's involvement in the wellness space. You mentioned there was a letter from the FDA that was allowing the device to be sold for wellness, but then I think you mentioned earlier that it wasn't necessarily like regulated by them in the wellness space. Is the letter basically just saying, like, this seems safe and, the claims, it's possible that these claims are true, for example?
Yeah, I suppose, I think if you read the wellness guidance, which, there's formalized wellness guidance, I actually think maybe it was 2016 it came out, you can work out if you fall under those regulations, or if you kind of fall under the wellness category. And my understanding is that you don't necessarily have to ask the FDA. If you feel that you meet those points in the wellness guidance, then you can kind of go for it. But the risk with that is if the FDA do not agree with that, maybe later down the line, or somebody gets injured or something, or there's a complaint, then you actually could end up in quite a lot of trouble with the FDA. And some companies are happy to take that chance, but we always knew we wanted to be approved or FDA cleared or regulatory approved with the FDA. So we were like super duper cautious. And what we actually did was we submitted, it's called a 513G form, and it's actually how devices are classed. So you're class 1, class 2, or class 3. So we completed a full 513G submission, and our conclusion was we are neither class 1, class 2, or class 3, and we fit under this wellness guidance. And the FDA came back, and I don't want to embellish almost what they've said, but they basically said they agree with that, and so long as we stay within the kind of claims that we're making, although they're not really claims, it's just like this is for weight management, so it's just a generic kind of intervention almost, but it's not like a medical claim. As long as you stay within inside, that kind of restriction, then they're not going to enforce a regulatory review. So for us, that was a huge kind of milestone, because, as I say, we probably could have just started doing it, but then had we fallen foul of the FDA, it might have really had a negative impact on what we're doing now with the FDA. So it was really great that they came back and said, yeah, this is fine. And then additionally, what we found was being able to show that. So we had that on our Indiegogo page, and we were showing people, look, this is what we want to do. We want to get to approval with the FDA, but in the meantime, we can do it this way. So there's lots of benefits to that. But in short, yeah, if you feel you fall under the wellness category classification, then as far as I know, but don't hold me to this, but I think you can just go ahead and start marketing the device.
Totally understandable how it would be useful and just important to have that kind of concurrence or agreement from the FDA that it does fall into that section.
Yeah.
So
we've also had the opposite. We've actually had a negative outcome with this as well. So we also launched our sleep product on Indiegogo. That was maybe back in 2019, maybe, for the same purpose. We want to get FDA approval, but in the meantime, we want to gather real world data and see what actually happens, in your day-to-day life. And again, really crazy response. It was fantastic. And then we were waiting and waiting and waiting on the FDA's letter. And then it turns out that in 2019, they had updated the guidelines around for insomnia. And we kind of got caught in the middle of this. So it took a year. It literally took 1 year to get a reply. And the reply was, actually, we think you're a medical device, so we don't want you to ship these to customers in the US. And this was us having already sold these to some degree, or pre-sales on Indiegogo. So we then had to go back to our users and our supporters and say, well, look, we're really sorry. We did not expect this. It's effectively the same as the weight management device. It would be a sleep management device, but in Europe, UK, wherever, we can do this, but specifically in the US, we're not allowed to ship. But if you don't mind, if you wait until we get approval, we'll ship. That, as I say, it was maybe 2019, and now it's 2024, and we're now going back finally to say, guess what, everyone, we got the approval. So if you can send us your prescriptions, then we'll start shipping these.
Oh, wow. So the outcome the early outcome turned out a little bit differently for these two different paths here.
Yeah. And back to my earlier point, if we had just started selling these without the sleep management device, if we had just started selling those without the FDA or without that letter, then it probably would have been fine, because we want to be just super safe and transparent, and we then presented it all to the FDA, and then surprisingly, and it's fine. Like that's not a criticism of them at all. It's just the way it turned out, that we had one device was okay for wellness, and we assumed the second device would be the same, and they ended up not allowing us to go forward.
Well, at least it all works out for the best in the long run with this clearance of that indication that wasn't able to be used for wellness back in the past.
Yeah, no, that's it. I mean, we're in a far better position now, but yeah, for our US customers, we're really thankful for just how patient they've been while we've went through all of this. Yeah, hopefully that's in the next few weeks. We'll probably start shipping out devices as the prescriptions are coming through.
That's really exciting. And so to zoom out a little bit, I was wondering, do you have any advice for students or young professionals looking to work in the field of neurotech?
I think there's a couple of almost ways forward into like just neuro in general. So for anyone who's thinking of going into that from a career point of view or an academic point of view, strongly recommend it. It is such an interesting subject, and you have such a really wide scope. As I said at the start, right through from sort of psychology, psychiatry, to the other end of the spectrum, which is neurosurgery, and everything in between. And I think years ago, where not that long ago, mental health was almost seen as something totally separate. It was like you've got your physical health in your body, and then somewhere else you have got this kind of like mental thing, and these two are not connected. It's not that long ago that was the view in medicine, but now we know that's just nonsense, and that is so intricately connected. So from your physical nervous system to actually your psychology and your consciousness, all of those things impact human health. So yeah, it's a super exciting time, I think, for anyone who's thinking of maybe a career in that side, in the research academia side. And then specifically for the entrepreneurial side, I think again, it's a super exciting time. People are becoming more and more familiar with neurotechnology and this entire space, and the amount of companies that are coming up with these different technologies that provide a lot of them non-invasive, but all of them pretty much drug-free. Again, that's a super exciting time. So if someone were wanting to say transition from research in the lab to starting their company and getting funding and doing the clinical trials needed for approvals, yeah, I strongly recommend that. As I say, I think it's just the perfect time for something like that.
I agree. It really is an exciting time. That point that you said about the physical and mental health all being interconnected, it really resonated with me. And I'm glad that that is starting to be recognized. And kind of going back to what you said about this being an exciting time in the space, do you have any predictions for the space over perhaps the next 20 years, both in a zoomed in sense and focusing on your specific subspace within neurotechnology, and then also just in a zoomed out sense and looking at the field of neurotechnology at large?
Yeah, I think looking at our closer to our area, cranial nerve stimulators, I think we're just scratching the surface. So you have 12, although some people would argue 13 pairs of cranial nerves. 10 of those connect directly to your brainstem. So there's 10 direct channels. Like imagine having an Ethernet cable plugged into a computer. You've literally got 10 of those. We use cranial nerve 8. Vagus nerve is cranial nerve 10. But there are other ones. So I know there's a bit of work now on the kind of trigeminal nerve. There's also a device looking at the facial nerve, particularly the element of the facial nerve that goes down to the tongue. It treats tinnitus or tinnitus. So you stimulate the surface of the tongue and you listen to audio feedback, and it actually can, I think it's neuroplasticity, then kind of rewires against the tinnitus. And that's done through the surface of the tongue. It's sort of crazy. So I think more and more companies will come out now looking at this the cranial nerve space. Additionally, I think we're starting to see approvals come through now for the sort of prefrontal cortex stimulators. So there's a few devices out now, have some regulatory approval. I'm not sure if it's FDA, but they're approved for various mental health disorders. So I think we'll start seeing more and more of that come through. But then in a general sense, I suppose, the whole computer brain interface approach is kind of a hot topic right now. I think as technology advances and it gets smaller and smaller, the issues that people have by putting electrical components inside the skull, one of the most common issues is just you get an inflammatory reaction and there's swelling because maybe you put a little array of electrodes on the surface of the brain or whatever. I think as those get smaller and smaller and smaller, we'll start to actually get past those issues. So actually, I would see, whilst we're all going non-invasive, with time, as the technology gets smaller, I think we'll end up going more and more invasive, and sort of going in. But as I say, I know that's a pretty hot topic right now generally.
Well, I'm definitely excited to see what happens next. I didn't have any additional questions for you today, but I was wondering, is there anything that we didn't talk about that you would like to bring up before we ended the call?
Well, just that, I'm really supportive of other companies. I think, that whilst we're all, you might be competitive in some ways, we're all trying to achieve the same thing, and it's, improve human health in a way that doesn't require drugs. I think that's a fantastic cause to get behind. So anyone in the space, competitor or not, I try my best to be there to answer questions or help them, or just chat through the difficulties that we're having. If anyone's in the space and they ever want to reach out or whatever, then certainly I try my best to get back.
It really is a strong community in the space, and as you mentioned, I think everybody or most people in the space really do have a similar goal of just trying to improve human health and improve the lives of patients. And so you mentioned if people reach out to you, you're generally happy to discuss things, and kind of to go a little bit deeper on that, who should reach out to you and how can they reach out to you? And then also, like, what are the main topics that people should, for example, reach out to you about?
Yeah, we're always interested in collaborations or clinical trials or working together. But the one thing I would say is what we really like are trials that are designed to show a clinical outcome. So quite often we get asked, oh, can we put your devices into a trial and it's going to be In fact, I'll give a very specific example. A company approached us about doing a trial to measure heart rate variability, because heart rate variability is a big, this is sort of area of interest right now. But the idea was that this will we're going to treat anxiety, and we're going to show the anxiety treatment by a decrease in increase in heart rate variability. But the reason we weren't super keen to go forward with that is that's not a clinical outcome. It's just a measure of heart rate variability. The questions we wanted to ask were, what's the person's generalized anxiety score? What's their feelings about self-harm, suicide? What drugs do they need to take, or have they been able to reduce their drugs? Are they taking loads of recreational drugs? Are they drinking loads of alcohol? Have they been admitted to hospital? So those are the outcomes that we are super keen on. So if anyone is interested in doing something like that, they should just email me. My UCSD email is probably the best for that type of thing. And then we'd look at maybe designing or partnering a trial. We try our best to support that with, often we'll give a certain amount of devices for free. If it's like a uni designing a trial in a lab somewhere, we try to help as best we can. But yeah, as I say, the key thing is anyone looking at what is a really measurable clinical outcome and not just a biomarker or surrogate marker, then for sure reach out.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll be sure to put some, links to your company's website in the show notes and everything, so it's easy for listeners to find you if they are working on something of that sort. I just wanted to say thanks again for coming on today. It's been super interesting, and I'm really looking forward to kind of keeping my eye on your company and seeing what you do next.
Thanks very much. Yeah, and thanks for having me on the show. Always keen to promote neuroscience, neurotechnology, medical devices. So yeah, no, I appreciate the opportunity and for the questions that you've asked.